The weight of the silver tray was nothing compared to the weight of the eviction notice taped to her apartment door. Amara navigated the glittering ballroom, her white dress and red vest a cheap uniform in a sea of bespoke suits and designer gowns. Each clink of champagne glasses was a reminder of a world she served but could never touch. Her smile, practiced and precise, was a mask for the panic clawing at her throat. The catering agency had been her last resort, this high-profile gala her first and likely final chance to make enough to stop the landlord's final call. She moved between tables with a dancer's grace born of desperation, her focus absolute. Do not drop anything. Do not spill anything. Do not draw any attention. Her gaze swept the room, cataloging the exits, the security, the faces of the city's elite. It was a habit, a survival instinct. And then she saw him, holding court at the central table, without saying a word. Jin-Woo Kwon. His name was a whisper in the city's underworld, a name synonymous with power and ruthless efficiency. He was younger than the legend suggested, a handsome 31-year-old in a perfectly tailored black suit, his stillness a stark contrast to the boisterous affair around him. His presence was a black hole, pulling in all the light and attention in the room. Her manager's warning echoed in her head. Table 7 is Mr. Kwon. Be invisible. Be perfect. Amara's path took her near a secondary table, where 4 men sat, their backs to the main floor. They were laughing, but their eyes were cold, constantly scanning. As she straightened a place setting nearby, her eyes fell upon their conversation, and an old, familiar instinct took over. A skill honed through years of watching silent movies with her late grandmother, a game that became a secret language. Her brain translated the silent movements of their lips into chilling words. The primary agent is in the amuse-bouche, the man with the scar on his lip mouthed silently, his smile never faltering. Completely inert. Odorless, another man, older, with silver hair, replied with a subtle movement of his mouth. The catalyst is in the wine pairing for the main course. Only his specific vintage, the third man's lips barely moved. Once it combines, it's irreversible. Systemic necrosis within the hour. Looks like a heart attack. The fourth simply formed a single word. Kwon, the silver tray in Amara's hands suddenly felt like it was welded to her skin. Her breath hitched. They were talking about poisoning Jin-Woo Kwon. Right here. Right now. Her eyes darted to Kwon's table. The sommelier was approaching with the wine. The first course, the amuse-bouche, was already being plated in the kitchen. She was scheduled to serve it. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. This was not her world. She was a waitress, trying to make rent, not a player in a deadly game of assassins and mafia bosses. But their words had trapped her. Knowing was an action. Silence was a choice. Silence was complicity in a man's murder. And a man like Jin-Woo Kwon would have associates who would tear this hotel apart looking for answers. She, the server who brought him the poisoned food, would be the first person they would look at. She was trapped between a silent execution and a violent one. Amara's mind raced, a frantic torrent of impossible choices. Calling security was a death sentence. She had no proof, just the silent, impossible words she'd plucked from the air. In a world of wealth and power, the word of a temp waitress was less than nothing. The men at the table looked like any other guest, their bespoke suits a perfect camouflage. They would deny it, and she would be dismissed as a lunatic, or worse, part of an elaborate setup. Then she would be left exposed to them, a loose end they would surely tie up. No, the official channels were closed to her. The kitchen doors swung open, and a line of servers emerged, each carrying a tray with the exquisitely prepared amuse-bouche. Her manager, a man with a perpetually stressed expression, caught her eye and gestured impatiently. It was time. Her tray was presented to her, a single, perfect dish in the center. It looked innocuous, a delicate assembly of rare ingredients that probably cost more than her month's rent. But to her it was a bomb. She took the tray, her hands trembling so slightly she hoped no one would notice. Every step toward table 7 was a step toward an execution. She could see Jin-Woo Kwon clearly now. He was listening to an older man beside him, his expression unreadable, his eyes holding a deep, calculating coldness. He was dangerous. Every story she'd ever heard about him confirmed it. But the four men at the other table were a different kind of danger, a slithering, unseen poison. As she approached, she saw the sommelier pouring a deep red wine into a glass reserved specifically for Kwan. The catalyst. It was all happening exactly as the silent conversation had promised. Her moment was running out. Jinwoo looked up as she neared, his dark eyes locking onto hers. It was just for a second, but it felt like an eternity, as if he were performing a rapid, invasive scan of her very soul. In that instant, she made her decision. It wasn't a plan, it was a desperate, primal act of self-preservation. She was 2 feet from the table, the plate held out before her. She took one more step, and with a surge of adrenaline, she let her ankle twist unnaturally. A choked cry escaped her lips as she pitched forward, not away from the table, but directly toward it. The tray left her hands, and the world seemed to shift into slow motion. The tiny, poison dish sailed through the air, and the deep red vintage of wine in the glass seemed to leap up to meet it. The plate didn't just fall, it shattered against the table's edge, spraying the priceless food and poisoned wine across the pristine white tablecloth and the floor, a chaotic, irreversible mess. A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. The orchestrated elegance of the gala was broken. Amara landed hard on her knees, the impact jarring her teeth. But she wasn't looking at her ruined uniform or the furious face of her manager rushing toward her. She was looking at Jinwoo Kwan. He hadn't moved. He hadn't flinched. He was just watching her, his head tilted slightly, those cold, analytical eyes narrowed not with anger, but with an unnerving, piercing curiosity. He saw the truth. He saw the desperation. He saw that her fall was no accident. The ballroom's buzzing harmony shattered into discordant chaos. Her manager, a man named Henderson, was on her in a second, his face a mask of apoplectic rage. "You incompetent fool," he hissed, his voice low but vibrating with fury. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin like talons, and hauled her to her feet. "Do you have any idea who this is?
Get out.
You're fired. Get out of my sight." The humiliation was a burning wave, but fear was a freezing ocean that drowned it out instantly. Amara kept her eyes down, allowing herself to be pulled away, not daring to look at the four men whose plan she had just demolished. She could feel their stares like daggers in her back. Henderson dragged her through the maze of tables, hissing apologies to the stunned guests as they passed. They burst through the kitchen doors into a wall of heat and noise. He shoved her against a stainless steel counter, his face inches from hers. "Pack your things and get out of this hotel. You will be blacklisted from every agency in this city. You are finished." But before she could even process his words, 2 men in sharp, dark suits moved to block the staff exit. They were not hotel security. They were silent, imposing, and moved with a fluid, disciplined grace that spoke of military training. They flanked the door, their expressions utterly blank, their eyes fixed on her. Henderson's tirade faltered. He looked from Amara to the men, a flicker of confusion and fear in his own eyes. One of the men looked past her and gave a nearly imperceptible nod to someone behind them. Henderson's grip on her arm loosened. The 2 men stepped aside, and a third figure entered the kitchen. It was Jinwoo Kwan. The chaotic energy of the kitchen seemed to evaporate, replaced by a heavy, breathless silence. Chefs stopped chopping, waiters froze mid-stride. Jinwoo walked toward her, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the tiled floor. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze never leaving her face. He gave Henderson a sideways glance, a look so dismissive it was more insulting than any verbal command. "Leave," he said. The word was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried the unshakable weight of absolute authority. Henderson practically scrambled over himself to obey, disappearing into the ballroom. Jinwoo's attention returned to Amara. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken threat. He was studying her, dissecting her, his mind working behind those unreadable eyes. She tried to meet his gaze, but found she couldn't. Fear was a physical thing, a cold pressure in her chest. "That was a very expensive plate," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, an opening move in a game she didn't know the rules to. And a very clumsy fall she swallowed, her throat dry.
"I'm sorry."
"It was an accident." "No," he replied, taking a step closer. She could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne. "It wasn't. You looked at me just before you fell. You were terrified. Not of dropping a plate.
Of me eating from it. Why?"
His directness was a physical blow. There was no escape, no room to lie. His men still guarded the only exit. The entire kitchen staff was frozen in place, witnesses to an interrogation they would never speak of. She had a choice: maintain the lie and be discarded, or tell the insane truth and pray he believed her. She lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "They're going to kill you," she whispered, the words trembling but clear in the silent kitchen. Jin-woo's expression did not change. There was no shock, no alarm, only that same unnerving, analytical focus. It was the look of a man for whom threats of death were as common as the morning traffic. He tilted his head slightly, a silent invitation for her to continue. The two guards at the door shifted their weight, their postures broadcasting a heightened state of alert. The kitchen remained a tableau of suspended animation, the staff too terrified to move a muscle. "Who is going to kill me?" Jin-woo asked, his voice remaining level, almost conversational, which only amplified the tension in the room.
"How?"
Amara took a shaky breath, the story threatening to choke her.
"4 men.
At the table by the East Terrace doors. I was passing by. I saw them talking." She hesitated, knowing how insane the next part would sound. "I read their lips, a flicker of something, skepticism, perhaps intrigue, crossed his face." It was the first break in his stoic facade. "You read their lips," he repeated, the statement hanging in the air between them. "Yes," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of confidence. This was her one truth, her only card to play. The poison, a primary agent, was in the amuse-bouche, harmless by itself. The catalyst was in the wine. Your specific wine. Together, they caused something necrosis. They said it would look like a heart attack. It would be untraceable. She relayed the words with perfect recall, the chilling conversation seared into her memory. As she spoke, she saw one of Jin-woo's guards subtly tap his earpiece, his eyes scanning the ballroom entrance. They were communicating silently, efficiently. Jin-woo continued to watch her, his gaze intense, searching her face for any hint of deception. "Describe them," he commanded.
She did.
The man with the thin scar that bisected his lip. The older, distinguished one with silver hair. The third with a heavy gold watch, and the fourth who had said almost nothing but radiated a quiet menace. She described their suits, their positions at the table, every detail she had absorbed in those few frantic seconds. After she finished, a long silence descended once more. Jin-woo turned his head slightly and spoke in Korean to one of his men. The guard replied in the same language, his voice a low, clipped murmur. Jin-woo turned back to Amara. "My head of security is reviewing the surveillance footage for that table. He will have their faces identified within the hour. If you are lying to me," he let the threat hang, unspoken and absolute. The consequences were unimaginable. "But if you are telling the truth," he continued, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly, "you have made yourself a witness. Those men will not see you as a clumsy waitress. They will see you as a loose end. Your life is in danger." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow, confirming the very fear that had been suffocating her. He was not offering comfort. He was stating a fact, a tactical assessment of her new, terrifying reality. She had nowhere to go. Her apartment, with its eviction notice, was not a sanctuary. The assassins knew her face. Going to the police was useless. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. He saw the despair in her eyes. "You have a rare skill," he said, his voice now devoid of any interrogation. It was the sound of a businessman closing a deal. A very useful skill. I have a proposition for you. You will come with me. You will work for me. In exchange for your loyalty and your unique perception, I will provide you with my protection. No one will touch you. Amara stared at him, the proposition echoing in the silent kitchen. It wasn't a question. It was a declaration of terms. He spoke of protection, but it sounded like a prison sentence. Working for him meant entering his world, a world of shadows, violence, and silent conversations that ended in death. It was a world from which there was no exit. Yet, what was her alternative? To walk out that door alone, a target for a group of sophisticated assassins? She thought of the eviction notice, of the crushing debt, of a life lived on the knife's edge of poverty. Her current life was already a prison of sorts, just one with cheaper bars. Jin-woo Kwon was offering a different kind of cage, a gilded one, but a cage nonetheless. The difference was in his cage. She might live to see the next day. "You want to own me," she said, the words coming out bolder than she felt. It wasn't a question either. It was an accusation. A flicker of a smile, so faint it was barely there, touched his lips. "I want to own your skill. Your safety is a necessary prerequisite for its use. You will be compensated beyond what you could ever make serving canapés to men who plot murder between courses." He gestured dismissively at the opulent ballroom beyond the doors. The contempt in his voice was clear. He saw the world as a chessboard, and she had just revealed herself as a piece with a unique move. He had no intention of letting that piece fall into anyone else's hands. His guard's earpiece chirped. The man approached and murmured something in Korean to Jin-woo, his eyes darting to Amara for a fraction of a second. Jin-woo's expression hardened. "The table is empty," he said to her, his voice dropping, taking on a harder edge. "They're gone. All 4 of them. They left less than a minute after you were removed from the floor." The information was a cold spike of terror. They knew. They must have seen her being taken away not by hotel security, but by his men. They would assume she had talked, that she had exposed them. They were professionals. They wouldn't just disappear, they would start cleaning up. And she was the first, most dangerous loose thread. Her choice was gone. The world outside this kitchen had become a hunting ground, and she was the prey. He saw the realization dawn on her face. He didn't need to press the issue. The circumstances had done it for him. He simply watched her, waiting. He held all the cards. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a countdown. She thought of her life, the constant struggle, the gnawing anxiety. What was she even fighting to go back to? A life of fear and poverty, or a life of fear and luxury? "I need a place to live," she said, her voice barely a whisper. It was the only term she could think to negotiate, a pathetic grasp for some semblance of control. Jin-woo gave a single, sharp nod. "That is already taken care of. You will have everything you need. You will answer to me and only me. Is that understood?" Amara looked into the eyes of the city's most dangerous man, the man whose life she had just saved and who was now claiming hers in return. She thought of the 4 shadowy figures melting back into the city, their faces unknown, their resources limitless. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. Understood. It was a surrender.
It was a contract.
Her old life was over, finished in the space between a shattered plate and a whispered confession. Jin-woo turned without another word and walked toward the exit, his men falling into formation around him. One of them held the door open. He paused on the threshold, looking back at her. "Come," he commanded. And like a sleepwalker, Amara pushed herself off the cold steel counter and followed him out of the kitchen and into the abyss. Her exit from the hotel was a blur. One moment she was in the chaotic heat of the kitchen, the next she was being silently ushered through a private service corridor by Jin-woo's impassive guards. There was no paperwork, no final confrontation with Henderson, no retrieving her meager belongings from the staff locker room. Her previous life was severed with surgical precision. She was bundled into the back of a black sedan with tinted windows so dark they seemed to drink the city lights. Jin-woo sat beside her, the space between them charged with a tense, oppressive silence. He wasn't looking at her. He was on his phone, the the screen reflecting in his dark eyes as he absorbed information with quiet intensity. The car moved with an unnerving smoothness, cutting through traffic as if the other vehicles were parting for it. They didn't drive to a residential neighborhood. They descended into the city's financial heart, a canyon of glass and steel towers that clawed at the night sky. The car pulled into a private underground garage beneath a skyscraper that seemed to be made more of light than concrete. The penthouse was a world away from her cramped, water-stained apartment. It was a palace in the clouds, with floor-to-ceiling windows that displayed the entire city like a carpet of scattered jewels. The space was vast, minimalist, and decorated in stark shades of black, white, and gray. It felt less like a home and more like a corporate fortress. A woman in a severe black dress, introduced only as Ms. Choi, appeared and led Amara to a suite of rooms that were larger than her entire apartment. A walk-in closet was already stocked with clothes in her size, from casual wear to elegant dresses. Toiletries from brands she'd only seen in magazines lined the marble bathroom counter. It was a breathtaking display of wealth and efficiency. It was also deeply unsettling.
They knew her size.
They had anticipated her needs before she had even agreed to his terms. The illusion of choice she thought she'd had in the kitchen was just that, an illusion. Jin-woo had already decided her fate. Later, he summoned her to his office. It was a cavernous room dominated by a massive desk and a wall of monitors displaying security feeds from dozens of locations. Jin-woo gestured for her to sit in a leather chair opposite him. "We have preliminary identifications for two of the men," he said, his tone all business. He slid a tablet across the polished desk. On the screen were two faces, captured from the Gala's security cameras. They were clear, high-resolution images. The man with the scar is a freelance chemist from Eastern Europe known for creating bespoke, untraceable compounds. The older man is a disgraced former intelligence officer who now sells logistics and planning to the highest bidder. He looked at her, his eyes narrowed. They are professionals.
Ghosts.
They don't work for common street thugs. Someone with significant resources hired them to eliminate me. I want to know who. He swiped the screen, and a new video feed appeared. It was muted footage from a crowded cafe, filmed from a high angle. "A test," he stated simply. He pointed to a man and a woman engaged in an animated conversation at a small table. "Tell me what they're saying." Amara focused, her mind slipping back into that familiar space of pure observation. She watched their gestures, the cadence of their movements, the silent shapes their mouths made. "He's angry," she began, translating the visual noise into meaning. "He's saying she betrayed his trust. She's lying. She's telling him he's being paranoid, that she would never do that. He just accused her of stealing money from their company account. She's denying it, but she's glancing at her purse. She's planning to run," she continued for another minute, effortlessly dissecting their silent, dramatic confrontation. When she finished, Jin-woo leaned back in his chair, a look of cold satisfaction on his face. He tapped his keyboard, and the audio for the video feed filled the room, confirming her translation word for word. She had passed. "Your skill is genuine," he said. It was not a compliment. It was an appraisal, like a jeweler confirming the clarity of a diamond. "You will be my ears in rooms I cannot enter, and for conversations I am not meant to hear. We will find the people who hired these men. We will find out why they want me dead. And then we will return the favor." His words were calm, measured, and utterly ruthless. Amara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air-conditioned room. She was now a weapon in his arsenal, a tool for a war she never asked to be a part of. But as she looked at the city lights twinkling below, she also felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation: security. The eviction notice, the landlord, the endless grind for money. All of that was gone. In its place was a new, far more lethal set of problems, but for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't facing them alone. The thought was as terrifying as it was comforting. The days that followed were a surreal blend of opulence and paranoia. Amara lived in a state of luxurious captivity, a ghost haunting a glass tower. Ms. Choi, Jin-woo's severe and unnervingly efficient aide, became her shadow, instructing her on encrypted communications, situational awareness, and the art of becoming invisible in a crowd. She was given a new phone, a new laptop, and a new identity that existed only within the digital fortress of Jean Woo's organization. Her days were spent in a secure study, a room with a single panoramic window, and a bank of monitors. Jean Woo provided her with state-of-the-art surveillance equipment, drones with gyroscopic cameras, long-range microphones that could isolate a whisper in a storm, and a set of custom-made binoculars with optics so powerful she could read the serial number on a watch from a mile away. Her task was to watch. She watched his rivals, his allies, his employees. She scanned hours of footage from political fundraisers, corporate board meetings, and back-alley deals, her unique talent transforming silent videos into a torrent of actionable intelligence. She became Jean Woo's secret, all-seeing eye. The work was draining, and the isolation was profound. She was a prisoner in a palace, with the entire city spread at her feet, but utterly beyond her reach. One night, unable to sleep, she stood before the massive window in the main living area, watching the ceaseless flow of traffic on the arteries below. The city was a living, breathing thing, beautiful and indifferent. "You can't map a city by its lights," a voice said from behind her. She turned, startled, to see Jean Woo standing there, holding two glasses. He was out of his usual severe suit, dressed in a simple gray t-shirt and dark pants, and the change was disarming. He looked less like a crime lord and more like the handsome, tired man he was. He handed her a glass of water. "You have to understand its shadows. That's where the real map is drawn." He stood beside her, not too close, following her gaze. "Do you miss it? The world down there?" She thought for a moment, the ice in her glass clinking softly. "I miss the freedom to be anonymous," she admitted. "Down there I was nobody. Up here, I'm a piece in your game." His jaw tightened slightly. "A very important piece." There was a long silence, filled only by the hum of the building's climate control. "Why did you learn?" he asked, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "To read lips." She gave him a small, sad smile. "My grandmother. She lost her hearing when I was young. She loved old black and white movies, but she couldn't follow them anymore. So I learned. For her. We'd sit together, and I'd whisper the dialogue to her. It was our secret language." He turned to face her, his dark eyes searching hers. For the first time, she saw something other than calculation in them. It was a flicker of empathy, a recognition of her as a person with a history, with love and loss. "You turned a language of love into a weapon," he murmured, more to himself than to her. He hadn't meant for her to hear, but she did. And in that moment, the wall between them, the one made of fear and power, developed its first, tiny crack. Her new life found its rhythm, a sterile routine of surveillance and analysis. Her target was no longer just anyone, but a specific rival organization led by a brutal Russian oligarch named Viktor Orlov. Jean Woo's intelligence suggested Orlov was consolidating power, making aggressive moves into territories that had long been stable. Jean Woo believed the attempt on his life was not a random power play, but a strategic move orchestrated by someone using Orlov as a blunt instrument. Amara's assignment was to watch Orlov's public appearance at the City Opera's opening night. She wasn't in the audience. She was 3 blocks away, in a darkened office in a neighboring skyscraper, with her high-powered binoculars fixed on the opera house's private terrace. Ms. Choi was with her, a silent, watchful presence. For 2 hours, she observed the mundane pageantry of the city's elite. Then, during the second intermission, Orlov stepped onto the terrace with another man. This man wasn't Russian. He was an American, impeccably dressed, with the bland, forgettable face of a corporate lawyer or a high-level accountant. Amara zoomed in, her focus absolute. The wind was high, but their gestures were clear. "The board is getting nervous," the American mouthed, his expression tight with anxiety. "They want assurances." Orlov took a long drag from a cigar, his face a mask of casual arrogance. His lips formed the words slowly, with chilling precision. "The asset is in place. Kwan's infrastructure is about to have a catastrophic failure. Tell your board to have the buyout offer ready. When the company is bleeding, We acquire it for pennies on the dollar. The American looked relieved, but still anxious. And the loose ends? From the Gala? Orlov's smile was a predator's snarl. My people are still searching for the waitress. A minor complication. She will be found and silenced. The primary objective is the shipment. Once it arrives, Kwan's entire logistics network will be paralyzed. He'll be too busy putting out fires to even notice us picking his pocket. The American discreetly passed a small, metallic object to Orlov, a data chip. Amara's blood ran cold. They were still looking for her. She relayed the entire conversation to Ms. Choi, her voice a low, steady monotone that betrayed none of the terror she felt. Ms. Choi immediately got on her encrypted phone, speaking rapidly in Korean. They weren't just trying to kill Jinwoo. They were trying to dismantle his entire empire, using corporate tactics and brute force in a terrifyingly sophisticated merger. And she, the clumsy waitress, was a central, unresolved problem in their equation. An hour later, back in the penthouse, Jinwoo played the security footage of the terrace on a massive screen. He had already identified the American. Daniel Carver, Jinwoo said, his voice a low growl. Executive Vice President of Sterling Atlantic, a multi-billion-dollar tech logistics firm. They've been trying to force a hostile takeover of my port operations for 6 months. He paced before the screen, his controlled energy making the huge room feel small. They couldn't beat me in the boardroom, so they hired killers to take me off the board entirely. And Orlov is their attack dog. He stopped and looked at Amara, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. This shipment, he mentioned. It's the key. They're not just attacking me, they're attacking the foundation of my business. And they're still hunting you. He took a step closer to her. They think you are a weakness. I am going to prove that you are my greatest weapon. The information Amara provided sent a shockwave through Jinwoo's organization. The shipment was not just a package. It was a Trojan horse. Intelligence, brutally extracted from one of Orlov's low-level men, revealed it was a piece of sophisticated hardware, a logic bomb designed to be installed in the port's central server during a routine upgrade. Once activated, it would corrupt shipping manifests, erase container locations, and cripple Jinwoo's entire global logistics network in a matter of hours, costing him hundreds of millions and creating the chaos Sterling Atlantic needed to force their takeover. The exchange was scheduled to happen in 2 days at a derelict warehouse complex in the industrial district. Jinwoo decided to intercept it personally, a bold and dangerous move designed to capture the hardware and send a clear, violent message to Orlov and his corporate masters. For the first time, Amara was taken out of her glass tower and brought into the heart of the operation. She sat in the back of a black surveillance van, parked a quarter-mile from the target warehouse. The van was a mobile command center, packed with monitors displaying feeds from half a dozen hidden cameras and a silent, high-altitude drone. Her job was to provide real-time translations, to be Jinwoo's eyes and ears on the ground before his team moved in. The tension inside the van was thick enough to taste. Jinwoo sat beside her, his focus absolute as he issued quiet commands into his headset. Amara's heart pounded in her chest, a wild rhythm against the cool, professional silence of the van. On the main screen, a feed from the drone showed 2 black sedans pulling up to the warehouse. Orlov's men. A few minutes later, a panel van arrived. The handoff. Amara leaned closer, her eyes locked on the monitor, focusing on the 2 men who got out to talk. Everything is set. The first man's lips formed. The tech is in the case. The second man, Orlov's lieutenant, shook his head. His mouth moved, and a spike of pure ice shot through Amara's veins. He said, "Forget the case. Kwan's intel is too good. This is a trap." The first man looked confused, but the lieutenant continued, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "But the boss sends his regards. The whole building is the package. Say hello to Kwan for us." The welcome party starts in 5 minutes. Amara ripped off her headset, her mind screaming. "It's a bomb," she yelled, her voice raw with panic. "The whole warehouse is a bomb. They knew we were coming. It's a trap for you. 5 minutes. Jinwoo didn't hesitate. He didn't question. He trusted her completely. "Pull back," he roared into his microphone. "All teams pull back now. Egress protocols.
Go.
In the monitors, she saw his men, wraith-like figures in tactical gear, melting back into the shadows they had emerged from. The men on the ground scrambled back into their cars and sped away. A countdown started in Amara's head. 1 minute later, the warehouse on the screen dissolved into a silent, brilliant flash of white light. The drone camera feed cut out. Even from a quarter-mile away, the van shook from the force of the explosion, a deep, guttural roar that vibrated through the floor and into her bones. Silence. The only sound was the frantic ringing in her ears. His men were safe. He was safe. Because of her. Jin-woo turned to her, his face pale beneath its usual stoic mask. The adrenaline of the near-miss crackled in the air between them. He reached out, his hand surprisingly gentle, and cupped her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't even realized she'd shed. "Amara," he said, her name a quiet anchor in the chaotic aftermath. "You saved us." His eyes held an intensity that had nothing to do with tactics or strategy. It was raw, unguarded, and deeply personal. The professional barrier between them didn't just crack. It vaporized in the heat of the explosion and the shared thrill of survival. In that moment, she was not his asset, and he was not her protector. They were two people, alive against all odds, in a world that wanted them dead. The aftermath of the explosion was a storm of controlled chaos and cold fury. Back in the penthouse, which now felt less like a prison and more like a bunker, Jin-woo's organization was in lockdown. The trap had been too perfect, the enemy's foresight too precise. They hadn't just anticipated his move, they had known his source. They knew he was using a lip reader. The realization settled over them with the chilling weight of absolute certainty. There was a traitor in his inner circle. The paranoia was a tangible entity in the vast, silent apartment. Jin-woo's trust, once a shield, was now a shattered mirror. He cut off communication with all but 3 of his most senior personnel. Every protocol was questioned, every loyalty scrutinized. The circle of trust had shrunk to include only himself, his stoic head of security, and Amara. She was no longer just a tool. She was the only piece of intelligence he knew to be uncompromised. He brought her into the core of his operations, a secure room behind his office, known as the Arboretum. It was the brain of his empire, a place where data streams from his global operations were analyzed and strategies were born. He laid everything bare for her. The corporate structures, the shell companies, the shipping routes, the intricate web of alliances and rivalries that defined his world. "They used your skill against us," he said, his voice tight with suppressed rage as they stood before a massive interactive map of the city. "They fed us information they knew we would act on. Someone on my team told them what you can do. Someone told them you would be in that van." He was trusting her not just with his life, but with the very architecture of his power. This intimacy was more profound than any physical touch. They were partners now, bound by a shared enemy and a desperate need for the truth. For days, they barely slept, fueled by coffee and a burning urgency. They worked side by side, reviewing weeks of surveillance footage of his senior staff, looking for a whisper of betrayal. The hours blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and focus. The silence between them was no longer awkward or tense, but comfortable, a shared space of concentration. In these quiet moments, the unspoken attraction between them deepened, a silent current running beneath the surface of their grim task. And then, she found it. It was on footage from a crowded coffee shop, 3 weeks prior. She saw Lee, Jin-woo's second-in-command, a man he had mentored for a decade, a man he called his brother. He was meeting with Daniel Carver, the executive from Sterling Atlantic. On the surface, the meeting was innocuous. The audio was clear. They were discussing a recent football game. But Amara wasn't listening. She was watching. As Lee spoke about a touchdown, his hand, resting on the table, moved in a series of subtle, almost imperceptible gestures. Tapping a finger, sliding a thumb. It wasn't a nervous tick. It was a language. A silent, coded conversation happening in plain sight. Her blood ran cold. Jin-woo, she said, her voice a strained whisper. Play it again. Watch his hands. They replayed the clip, and she translated the silent movements, her heart sinking with every word. Lee was confirming security protocols, outlining weaknesses in the port's firewall, detailing Jinwoo's personal security detail. It was a complete and utter betrayal, delivered with a smile over a cappuccino. The mystery was solved. The enemy wasn't just at the gates. He had been sitting at Jinwoo's right hand all along. Jinwoo watched the silent confession without a word, his face carved from stone, but Amara could see the deep, painful wound that had been torn open behind his eyes. The discovery of Lee's betrayal did not unleash the explosion of rage Amara had expected. Instead, a terrifying calm settled over Jinwoo. It was the cold, focused stillness of a predator that has finally cornered its prey. The pain of the betrayal was there, visible in the new, hard lines around his eyes, but he channeled it into a singular, icy purpose. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no shouting match. There would only be a final, perfectly executed move in a game Lee didn't even know he was losing. He thinks he is the player, but he has always been the pawn, Jinwoo said, his voice dangerously quiet as they stood in the arboretum. We will let him make one last move for his new masters. The plan was simple and elegant in its cruelty. Jinwoo would feed Lee a piece of high-value, fabricated intelligence, information so tempting that Sterling Atlantic would be forced to act on it immediately. He would make Lee believe he was about to give them the keys to the entire kingdom. The bait was a fake meeting between Jinwoo and a rival cartel, supposedly to form an alliance against Orloff. The location was a private hangar at a municipal airport. Amara's role was the most critical. She would be positioned in an air traffic control tower overlooking the hangar, her binoculars trained on Lee. She had to watch him make the call, to read his lips as he passed the bait, providing the final, irrefutable proof of his treason. The night of the operation was thick with tension. From her perch, Amara had a clear view of the hangar and the surrounding tarmac. Through her lenses, she watched as Lee, thinking he was alone, paced nervously before making a call. She zoomed in, her breath held tight in her chest. His lips formed the words clearly. He's here. The meeting is happening now. Hangar 7. He brought a skeleton crew. You can take him. You can take everything. Her voice was steady as she relayed the message to Jinwoo over the encrypted comms. He passed the bait. Confirmation is absolute. Good, was all Jinwoo said. A moment later, the hangar doors slid open, not to reveal a rival cartel, but to show Jinwoo himself, standing alone in the cavernous space, flanked by his most loyal men. Lights flooded the tarmac, trapping Lee like a terrified animal. Jinwoo's men apprehended him, without a sound. Simultaneously, across the city, tactical teams who had been lying in wait moved on Sterling Atlantic's Black Operations site and dismantled Orloff's network in a series of swift, brutal raids. It was a perfectly synchronized symphony of retribution. The final scene played out not in a hail of bullets, but in the chilling silence of Jinwoo's office. Lee was brought before him. The confrontation was short, the dialogue clipped and heavy with the weight of broken brotherhood. Amara watched from the doorway, a silent witness to the end of a long and complicated relationship. Lee was led away, his fate sealed and unspoken. The war was not over, but a decisive battle had been won. Later, as the first hints of dawn stained the sky, Amara and Jinwoo stood at the great window of the penthouse, the city quiet below them. The immediate threat was gone. A fragile peace had been purchased. It's over, she said softly. For now, he corrected. He turned to her, the coldness in his eyes replaced by a weary vulnerability. They will regroup. They will come for me again. This life, this war, it doesn't end. He took a step closer, his gaze searching her face. I can give you a way out, Amara. A new name, a new life. Anywhere in the world you want to go. You will have enough money to never have to worry again. You will be safe. You can be anonymous again. He was offering her the very thing she had missed, the freedom she had lost. But as she looked at him, at this complex, dangerous, and brilliant man who had become the center of her world, She knew that anonymity was no longer what she wanted. He had seen her when she was invisible. He had valued her when she was worthless. He had trusted her when he trusted no one. "And what is the other option?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. His expression softened. "Stay," he said, the single word filled with a universe of meaning. "Stay with me. Not as my asset. As my partner." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. It was a question, a plea, and a promise all at once. The gilded cage had become a fortress, and its keeper was offering to share the throne. Amara looked from their joined hands to his face, and then out at the sprawling city below. It was no longer just a map of lights and shadows. It was her home. It was their kingdom. "We have a lot of work to do," she said, a small, determined smile touching her lips as she squeezed his hand.